Today, we're doing a deep dive into a film that, well, it started its life as a critical punching bag, a box office bomb, really, only to emerge, kind of like a terrifying alien from the Antarctic ice, as a bona fide masterpiece. John Carpenter's 1982 sci-fi horror classic, The Thing. We're talking about a movie that just defied all expectations to become this cornerstone of horror. So, okay, let's unpack this incredible journey from pariah to paragon.
It's truly a fascinating case study, isn't it, in artistic reevaluation. Our sources today, they walk us through why this film was so profoundly misunderstood when it first came out, and how its groundbreaking artistry eventually found its audience, and what its enduring legacy tells us about the evolution of horror cinema, and, maybe even more importantly, our own evolving relationship with fear. You're about to discover how a film deemed just too much by audiences and critics alike became, well, a foundational text for an entire genre, influencing everything from creature design to narrative structure for decades. It's really a story about challenging norms and the world finally catching up.
Okay, so section one. The cold reception, why The Thing froze out audiences, at least initially. For those of you who might remember 1982 or maybe just can't quite fathom it now, The Thing was, by all accounts, a massive flop. It got savaged by critics, barely made a dent at the box office, especially when you think about another certain friendly alien blockbuster that summer. When you look at the film now, with its incredible practical effects, its suffocating atmosphere, the relentless paranoia, it's genuinely hard to imagine how it wasn't an instant hit. So what was the cinematic landscape like back then? Why on earth did it reject this film so vehemently? What were audiences expecting? And how did The Thing just utterly fail to deliver on those expectations at the time?
It's a complete 180, isn't it? The shift in opinion. Today, it's, ubiquitously hailed as one of the greatest horror and science fiction films ever made. But that context, the early 1980s, it's absolutely crucial to understanding why it failed initially. The industry boom of the 1980s for horror, it was primarily fueled by the slasher craze.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. John Carpenter's own Halloween from '78 had already created this new spate of variations and imitations in that specific subgenre. Films like Friday the 13th had solidified a formula, and those were huge financial successes.
Right, so that was the mold.
Exactly. Audiences at the time were really accustomed to a very specific type of horror. They were used to, like, human-like killers, often masked with clear targets, typically teenagers. These films offered a sort of predictable, almost comforting terror in a weird way. You knew the rules.
Yeah, you could yell at the screen, "Don't go in there."
Right. You expected jump scares, a relatively clear line between good and evil, victim and monster. Think of Michael Myers from Halloween. He's certainly an emphatic misfit and outsider. Terrifying, absolutely. But he's still recognizably human, even if only marginally so.
Yeah.
He walks, he breathes, he has a knife. You can track him. There's a distinct, tangible threat there.
And The Thing then just shattered those expectations completely. This wasn't a masked killer lurking in the shadows. It was an unnameable, out-of-space creature, just inscrutable, formless, defying, easy categorization. It could be anyone, anywhere. It played on a totally different kind of fear. So how did that departure from the norm lead to it being, well, vilified?
Well, what's truly fascinating here is that the very things that were originally vilified, its bleakness, its shocking gore, its profound sense of hopelessness, and its famously ambiguous ending, those are now celebrated as its greatest strengths.
So?
Psychologically, horror usually aims to generate fear, shock, or disgust, but typically within what we call a safe context.
A safe context. What do you mean by that?
It means that while you're experiencing intense fear, you're always kind of aware you're in a controlled environment. A movie theater, your living room, right?
Yeah.
There's this sort of unwritten contract with the audience.
Yeah.
It will scare you, but will also give you some form of catharsis or resolution in the end.
Okay, makes sense.
The Thing just pushed the limits of that safety contract.
Yeah.
Way beyond what audiences in '82 were ready for. It didn't offer catharsis. It didn't offer a clear resolution. It didn't even offer a monster you could easily understand or, defeat. Instead, it left you with this gnawing sense of existential dread. The monster isn't just physical, it's conceptual. It mimics, it hides, it erodes trust. It makes you question the humanity of everyone around you, even yourself. And this lack of resolution, this lack of clear form, it connects directly to the core of cosmic horror. Think H.P. Lovecraft, where the unnameable, the thing we cannot understand or put into words, becomes the source of fear.
Wow.
The Thing embodies this perfectly. It presented a psychological challenge that was just too intense, maybe too unfamiliar, for mainstream audiences back then. The monster isn't just an antagonist, it's this alien force operating beyond human comprehension. It exists on a scale that just dwarfs our understanding. And that vast, empty, desolate Antarctic landscape, it almost becomes a character itself, amplifying that feeling of human insignificance. It asked audiences to confront this profound, inescapable paranoia and dread they weren't really looking for in their horror films.
They wanted the jump scares, the chase, the final confrontation.
Exactly. They wanted to be scared, sure, but they also wanted to leave feeling safe again. And the thing just denied them that comfort, flat out.
Okay, so section 2. The visceral genius of practical effects and immersive filming. So, if the creature itself was so different from what audiences were used to, let's talk about how it was brought to life, because this is where it gets really interesting for me. The practical effects. Rob Bottin, an absolute mad genius, a true visionary. I read he was notoriously secretive, often refusing to show Carpenter the final creature effects until the day they were actually filming them. Now, that's dedication. That goes beyond just the reveal for us, the audience. It was about getting the actors' reactions as genuine, as raw as possible. So how did that commitment, that element of surprise on set, how did that translate to the audience's experience? What kind of impact did it have?
Oh, that secrecy was a stroke of genius.
Pure
Genius. It leads directly to what psychologists call mirroring, where the actor's authentic fear amplifies your own fight-or-flight response. It creates an intense visceral thrill. When the actors are genuinely reacting to something shocking and unknown, that emotional contagion is incredibly powerful. It just bypasses your intellectual brain and goes straight for the gut, the primal fear centers.
So you feel like you're right there with them.
Exactly.
Yep.
Experiencing the terror firsthand. You see the shock, the disgust, the pure terror on their faces, and your brain reads it as real danger, even if you know it's a movie.
And you can absolutely see it in those moments. Like, take the iconic dog thing transformation scene. That gruesome flowering head still makes my stomach churn thinking about it. That was actually a ComPlayer hand puppet operated by puppeteers from beneath the set, literally blooming and writhing. And get this, the slime that covered it, giving it that revolting texture. It was made from KY jelly, creamed corn, and mayonnaise.
Oh, God.
Can you imagine that concoction? It sounds absolutely disgusting, which is exactly why it works so well. It created this tangible, messy, utterly repulsive reality. Even the best CGI today struggles to replicate that same raw physical impact. You almost feel the sliminess yourself.
It's that tactile, messy reality. That's what sticks in your memory. And, it's also worth noting the collaboration involved. When Bottin's team was just overwhelmed by the sheer scope of it all, effects legend Stan Winston actually stepped in to help create the initial puppet, uncredited, just out of professional respect. That says a lot about the talent involved, the spirit behind it, even competitors helping each other achieve something groundbreaking.
That's amazing. True dedication beyond ego. And then, of course, there's the infamous Spiderhead scene, arguably one of the most iconic, terrifying moments in horror history. Norris's severed head sprout spider legs scubbles across the floor. That image is burned into my brain. How did they pull that particular nightmare off?
Ah, the Spiderhead. Unforgettable, just audacious. The head itself was a radio-controlled puppet, which gave it that unsettling, unnatural movement, and its severing, accomplished with a remarkably simple but effective heated wire, gave it this clean, horrific cut that felt incredibly real. But the genius isn't just the effect itself, it's the reaction it gets. And that famous line from Palmer, "You gotta be effing kidding."
Yeah.
That was an actual ad-lib from the actor, David Clennon. A genuine guttural response to the grotesque puppetry unfolding in front of him. It perfectly captures not just his character's disbelief, but the exact reaction of anyone watching that scene. Still does.
Wow.
It sells the absurdity while making it terrifying because it feels like a real human reaction to an impossible horror. That blend of practical, believable effects and authentic human reactions, that's what locks the terror in.
But it wasn't just the creatures creating that unease. The whole production cultivated this almost unbearable discomfort for the cast and crew. It really translated to the screen. The film's oppressive isolation was no illusion. They weren't just pretending to be cold and miserable. They actually filmed for long stretches in genuinely freezing conditions, near Stewart, British Columbia, surrounded by desolate, snow-covered landscapes. Amplified that feeling of being cut off.
You can feel it.
Yeah. This experience fostered a camaraderie born from shared misery that just emanates from every frame. You see their breath fogging, you feel the chill, the desolation on their faces.
And Carpenter, being Carpenter, took extreme measures, even on the LA sound stages, for interior scenes.
Refrigerated sets, right?
Yeah. Refrigerated them to around 40 degree F, 4 degrees C, just to ensure the actor's breath would be visible, to enhance that realism of the cold.
That's commitment.
Total commitment. And Kurt Russell, as R.J. McGreedy, He truly embodied that, performed many of his own dangerous stunts. Real physical investment.
Like handling a real flamethrower.
Exactly. During the finale, nearly blew himself up in the process. This wasn't just acting. It was an immersive, physically demanding ordeal.
Wow.
This unwavering commitment to old-school filmmaking where they lived it, rather than just relying on CGI, it truly anchored the fantastical horror in a tangible reality. It wasn't about creating something pristine or artificial. It was raw, messy, physically taxing for everyone. From the puppeteers covered in, well, mayo and creamed corn, to the actors enduring freezing temperatures and doing dangerous stunts. This physical embodiment of discomfort and fear, you, the viewer, you feel it deeply because it's rooted in something physically experienced. You don't just see the cold, you feel it. You don't just see the desperation, you feel the weight of it. It lends this authenticity to the terror that's often missing with purely digital effects. It makes you feel trapped, both in the station and, inside their own possibly compromised bodies.
Okay, section 3. Crafting the atmosphere, cinematography, and score.
All right, so beyond the amazing physical effects and the performances, the film's atmosphere is just meticulously crafted. And a huge part of that is the visual artistry, the cinematography by Dean Cundey. It's a masterclass in psychological manipulation. It forces your mind to fill in the blanks, which, let's be honest, is often way more terrifying than anything explicitly shown. He used the anamorphic widescreen format to masterful effect, that wider stretched image. It allowed him to compose shots with these vast areas of negative space, often placing the character small within this expansive dark frame. It makes every dark corner a potential threat. It just amplifies that pervasive paranoia.
So it literally makes them look small and vulnerable.
Exactly. Dwarfed by the environment. And it forces your imagination to conjure something awful lurking just out of sight. It really leans into that idea of horror as a phobic cultural form, right? A safe space to confront our anxieties about the unknown, losing our identity, betrayal. The terror isn't just on screen. It's vividly in your head, generated by the unseen, what might be there. And Cundey even had this subtle lighting trick. Apparently, he'd give human characters a small glint of light in their eyes.
Really?
Yeah, a subtle tell that would be conspicuously absent in those who'd been assimilated.
No way. That adds another whole layer to the paranoia.
Right. That fundamental, gnawing question, who can you trust? It's a subliminal detail constantly feeding the dread, making you scrutinize everyone.
And then there's the score. What an incredible, almost unbelievable journey for Ennio Morricone's work on this film. It's so powerful now, so unsettling. But when it first came out, wow, harsh reaction. How did something so perfect for the film get it so wrong in the eyes of critics back then?
Yeah, it's wild. Morricone's score for The Thing is so distinctive, instantly recognizable. It's described as minimalist, dread-soaked, built around a simple, pulsating synthesizer heartbeat. It's sparse, heavy, incredibly oppressive. But here's the kicker. Upon release, it was so misunderstood it was actually nominated for a Razzie for Worst Musical Score.
A Razzie, I can't believe that.
I know. It's genuinely hard to square that with its current status as one of the most revered horror scores ever.
So how does that happen? How does something so reviled become seen as, brilliant?
Well, it raises that important question, right? From a neurobiological view, music is absolutely key to the genre's unique character because it has this profound power to create an overwhelming visceral experience. Morricone's score doesn't just underscore dread, it is the dread. It works on that deep, oral level. That constant loath from builds this inescapable tension. It contributes to the overall arousal, that heightened physiological alertness, which, when you combine it with the controlled environment of watching a movie, becomes intensely pleasurable for horror fans.
Right, the safe scare.
Exactly. It's not about sudden stingers or traditional tunes. It's that nerve-jangling discord. You see it in some giallo films, too, those stylish Italian thrillers. It's designed to make your hair stand on end, keep you perpetually on edge without cheap jump scares. It gets under your skin.
And talk about ultimate vindication. 3 unused pieces from that very same Morricone score. Quentin Tarantino used them later in The Hateful Eight, another film masterfully building claustrophobic tension. And for that film, Morricone actually won an Academy Award.
Incredible, right?
It's the perfect example of how what was once dismissed as wrong or bad can, with time and evolving tastes, finally be recognized as genius. Sometimes art just needs its audience to catch up.
Or maybe it just takes another visionary to shine a light on it.
Okay, section 4. The psychology of horror and evolving audience taste.
Yeah, this whole journey from The Thing being a pariah to a paragon, it perfectly illustrates what we explore in the psychology of horror. Why do we seek out recreational fear, this voluntary engagement with frightening entertainment? because it allows for fear rehearsal or threat simulation. It's a safe way to experience intense emotions, intense physiological responses, adrenaline surge, heart pounding without any real danger. You get the rush, but you know you're safe on the couch. That's the appeal for many.
Okay, so the initial poor reception, maybe it was just too real, or its profound sense of hopelessness violated that unwritten contract of catharsis you mentioned.
I think that's a big part of it. Most horror films back then, especially slashers, gave you that closure. The evil was defeated, or at least contained. The world returns to normal. They provided a clear villain, clear conflict, clear resolution. But if an experience is too terrifying or feels too real, pleasure evaporates and is replaced by genuine terror. The Thing just denied the audience that satisfying release they expected.
Right. MacReady survives at the end, maybe, but that famously ambiguous ending. We don't know if he's human, if Childs is human, if the monster is still out there, disguised. It denies that neat resolution, that comforting sense the monster's contained, which was such a contrast to other horror films offering that conservative or reactionary streak, restoring order. The Thing doesn't do that. It forces you to live with the uncertainty, wrestle with it long after the credits roll.
And that ambiguity, that's precisely what makes it such a profound thought exercise, as our sources put it. It requires projection into the situations of characters, enables those visceral impressions. It forces you to internalize the fear, which is why it lingers.
Exactly. You're left with an existential question, not a neat solution. And that's where, like you said, the unnameable, the thing we cannot understand, becomes the source of fear. It's not a monster you can just punch. It's a concept that eats away at your reality.
Yes, sir.
You know, what I find endlessly fascinating is our relationship as an audience to horror. Carol J. Clover, she's brilliant, talks about how horror audiences are startlingly competent in the linguistic sense and startlingly public about how they engage. We know the formula, right? We predict the kills, we yell at the screen, sometimes we even laugh at really tense moments. It's this highly ritualized and formulaic character we actively participate in.
Absolutely. And Clover argues that total predictability did not create boredom or disappointment. Rather, the predictability was clearly the main source of pleasure. It's a shared experience of getting the shit scared out of you and loving it, in an exchange mediated by adrenaline. You go in expecting a certain kind of ride, and the film delivers that rush. What's particularly insightful is Clover's analysis of the demographics back then. The majority audience, especially in the 70s and 80s, was largely young and largely male. And these viewers would famously cheer the killer on as he assaults his victims, then reverse their sympathies to cheer the survivor on as she assaults the killer. It's this complex, almost contradictory identification process.
Okay, so even if The Thing isn't a traditional slasher, the audience seeing it initially or finding it later on video, they brought that slasher mindset, ready for the tropes, the expected scares. And then Carpenter just pulls the rug out with something far more existential, this body horror masterpiece playing on deep paranoia, identity crisis, not just jump scares. So how does that audience identification, particularly the male viewers, apply to a film like The Thing, which doesn't have a final girl?
That's a crucial point. This brings us to what Clover calls the politics of displacement and the male viewer's stake in the sadistic, voyeuristic side of horror. While traditional analysis often focuses on the male gaze objectifying female victims, Clover argues horror is actually far more victim-identified than the standard view would have it. She suggests the male viewer, often the majority viewer, is invited to identify with the female victim hero, or the final girl, the last one left alive to face the killer. This identification with the suffering victim, that's what she calls a masochistic aesthetic. The pleasure comes from identifying with the pain and fear, not with the aggressor, experiencing the terror with the victim.
Okay, I think I follow. So how does that fit with MacReady?
Right, applying this to The Thing, MacReady is clearly male, but the film absolutely puts him through the ringer: isolation, paranoia, the constant threat of assimilation, the ambiguity of his own humanity. It's almost like a Final Man scenario, but one that deeply leans into that feminized, masochistic experience for the audience. The film strips away MacReady's traditional masculine agency. It forces him into this state of prolonged vulnerability and uncertainty. He's not a hero who can just punch the monster. He's constantly reacting, deducing, fighting this seemingly unwinnable battle against an enemy that could be anyone, including himself.
So the audience experiences that vulnerability with him.
Exactly. By placing MacReady, and by extension you, the viewer, in this prolonged state of vulnerability and terror, it forces what Clover calls a reactive or introjective position. Basically, you're not the active problem solver. You're receiving the horror, passively absorbing the fear and helplessness alongside him, much like a final girl would. You feel the trust eroding, the gnawing doubt, the brutal physicality of his fight for survival. The film becomes this extreme experience, a thought exercise requiring you to project yourself into it, enabling those visceral impressions that truly challenge your own sense of safety and identity. It makes you ask, what would I do? If you couldn't trust your own body or anyone around you, it's relentless, deeply unsettling horror that gets under your skin through profound psychological torment, not just gore.
Okay, Section 5, the enduring legacy and influence.
And that influence is still being felt today, massively. It's hard to picture the horror landscape without it.
Yeah, like Quentin Tarantino. He's repeatedly called it one of the greatest films ever. And you can see its DNA in his work, right? Reservoir Dogs, The Hateful Eight, both masterfully homaging those themes of claustrophobic mistrust, paranoia in a confined group. And we know the Duffer Brothers, Stranger Things creators, cited Rob Bottin's practical effects as a primary inspiration for their creature designs, bringing that tangible, horrifying feel to a new generation. That's huge.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And its DNA is deeply embedded in the world of video games, too. Those mechanics of isolation, social deduction, they form the bedrock of huge titles. Think Dead Space isolation, body horror, grotesque creatures, or Among Us. It hinges entirely on that agonizing social deduction, the hidden identity mechanic. The imposter is a perfect mirror of the thing, sowing paranoia among friends. It's fascinating how a film that initially failed because it was too challenging, too brutal, eventually became this foundational text for later horror creators across different platforms, inspiring new generations, proving its timeless power.
You know, the way it prioritizes atmosphere and visceral experience over maybe a tight traditional narrative. It feels very reminiscent of the giallo genre, those stylish Italian thrillers from the 60s and 70s. They were often noted for strong cinematic technique, praised for editing, production design, music, visual style, even if the plots were sometimes less coherent.
Right, the focus was on the visceral experience.
Yeah, and The Thing absolutely nails that. Dario Argento, a big giallo director, his work often vacillated between strategies of art, cinema, and exploitation. That feels very similar to Carpenter's approach here, crafting something deeply artistic, unsettling, but also incredibly visceral and shocking.
Precisely. And giallo films themselves had a lasting effect, influencing the slashers and splatter films of the early 80s with their cinematic style and unflinching content, pushing boundaries. So The Thing sits at this interesting crossroads, influencing and being influenced by the larger currents of horror. It's also interesting to see a parallel shift happening in Japanese horror films around the same time. In the 80s, they started moving away from gory slasher-style films towards the psychologically thrilling and intensely atmospheric type, focusing more on psychological horror, tension-building, suspense, and the supernatural, like ghosts, poltergeists. The Thing mirrors that global shift towards deeper psychological impact over just violence or cheap scares, prioritizing dread, internal conflict. Carpenter was really ahead of his time, not just in the West.
It's almost like the world finally caught up to what Carpenter and Bottin were doing, and a massive part of that, I think, has to be the home video market. It played such a crucial role, like a rehabilitation center for films that had been unfairly maligned. Suddenly, The Thing found this new life, a new audience, a new appreciation. You could pause, rewind, truly marvel at Bottin's effects. Rewind the chest chomp scene in disbelief just to watch it again, you know? Debate that ambiguous ending with friends over and over, dissecting every frame for clues. It allowed for this deeper, more personal engagement that just wasn't possible in its quick theatrical run.
And this allowed audiences to develop a more sophisticated palette, to become connoisseurs of practical effects, fluent in the language of gore. By the time films like David Cronenberg's The Fly came out in '86, just 4 years later, audiences were seasoned veterans of the video store. They were primed and ready for its own jaw-dropping, stomach-churning practical effects. The Thing absolutely helped lay that groundwork. It fostered an audience that could understand and embrace its unyielding, uncompromising vision. It opened doors for a different kind of horror, visceral dread, psychological torment over simple jump scares, moving beyond spectacle to truly unsettle you.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The Thing isn't just a brilliant film. It's a pivotal moment in how we consume and appreciate horror. It pushed boundaries, refused easy answers, and ultimately shaped the nightmares future filmmakers and audiences would embrace. From deep space to the darkest, most paranoid corners of our minds, it taught us that true terror isn't always about what you see, but about what you can't see and what you can no longer trust.
Indeed, it's a true paragon. Its journey from rejection to acclaim highlights the evolving nature of taste, the power of uncompromising art, and how challenging work can reshape our perceptions of what's terrifying and what's profound. For you, this deep dive shows that sometimes The true genius of a work is only revealed when the world finally catches up. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other masterpieces do you think are still out there, waiting for their moment, misunderstood today, but destined for future acclaim?